So, welcome. Good morning to most of you, but I've already seen someone calling in from the Hawaii. So, that's good evening. And, well,
Hello.
thanks for being here. Another day, another Dhamma, another week. And, well, the reason I'm popping in today is because this is a particular week. We are late July and we'll be going through August. And August is normally the month where Sangha Life takes a break, the summer break. And we will be having the break, but we thought, we're going to start on July 29th, so let's do the whole week. Well, it happens that Miles will be traveling on Friday and won't be able to lead the session. So as we're in August and Miles won't be able to be leading the session, we decided to just take the Friday off because it seemed more aligned than having someone else coming into Friday again. So the reason I'm here is mostly to let you know that we'll be here from today to Thursday, and then Friday we'll be starting our summer break, and hope that you can all have a summer break somehow, and some time to rest and reflect. But for the time being, we are here, and here we are, the whole of us, for this week and this morning. And Miles will be guiding us through the week, through cutting through the ultimate reality, which seems something like the Jedi stance, cutting through the ultimate reality for the last week of this first period before summer. It seems quite appropriate. Miles is quite a regular teacher with Sangha Life, but is also a lineage holder in the Mahasi tradition of meditation, and has been teaching for over 25 years meditation and the embodiment spiritual awakening to thousands of people around the world. His work focuses on establishing the practice of mindfulness, progressing through the development of meditative insight, and the evolving expression of the Dhamma in the world. He lives in Tel Aviv, Israel, and we're very glad to have Miles with us. So, we'll be here for the next hour. There will be time for meditation, guided practice, talk, and some Q&A by the end. You know that you have a little virtual hand on the bottom of the screen to click if you want to show up on screen to not scream, but screen to interact with Miles. And you can also use the chat where we are greeting each other to ask you questions. If you do so, please type question in capital letters so we can distinguish that from the regular appreciations and comments. Last thing I will mention is, of course, dana, the Buddhist practice of generosity, and the solely way to let and allow Sangha Life to thrive and survive. We don't have any other kind of sponsors or kind of any kind of sustainable or unsustainable, thank God, ways of keeping on, but the donations. So we would love you to see that as a way of engaging, not a way of paying for the sessions, but a way of just giving back. If you find these sessions a support to you, well, the way to give back that support is, apart from being here and practice and committing to the Sangha, is also giving back some of your financial capacity, if that's working for you. If not, well, stay with us, because that's what we're here for, and practice with us. If you are able to donate, I will let you have the link and at some point, and everything that you can give will be duly appreciated. And of course, during this week, everything that will be donated will also be shared with Miles. That's his livelihood, and that's a way to compensate his time, his wisdom, his practice with us. Okay, I think I've said enough. Thank you all for being here, and I wish you all a very good session.
Thank you, George. And thank you, Sangha Live, for the invitation and hosting me once again for this almost full week, 4 days of daily meditations. And thank you all for showing up. Just before I jump into the topic, I just want to say that today's session will be, I'll give a short talk, then we'll sit together, then I'll do a Q&A at the end. I believe that's the regular format. Probably tomorrow we'll change it a little bit. I'd like to offer once again the opportunity for somebody to do a hot seat interview. We have done those in my past meetings, where I invite somebody to come on screen with me, and we just chat about your practice. It's not it's actually not a chat. It's a very specific type of interview to help you understand the so-called nuts and bolts, a little bit deeper on how the practice is working for you. And I do want to say, last time I was here, I did that, and I brought somebody on screen, and we had a good interview. But I only realized afterwards that there was somebody in the queue before them, a person named Pubali. Let me see the name. Pubali Bardhan. And if Pubali is around, if anybody's around, I'd like to give her priority. Otherwise, anybody else can jump in for that hot seat interview. But I'll say more about that tomorrow. So today's topic. So today we're starting a week of looking at the topic of cutting through to ultimate reality. And I suppose it's good to start with a quick definition of ultimate reality. What is ultimate reality? We could also say absolute reality. And absolute reality would be anything that's not relative. It's absolute. So it's not my truth, which is completely valid, and it's not your truth, which is also completely valid, but they may not line up in some areas. Yeah, my truth is my truth, your truth is your truth. It's relative. One truth may be more truthful, the other may be are more aligned with reality, the other may be less aligned with reality, but it doesn't matter. It's in the relative world. We could say that all truths are relative, except for the absolute truths, of course. And the absolute truth points to ultimate reality. And Buddhism is resting on absolute truths. 2,500 years, this philosophy, religion, belief system, ethical practice, way of living, and path of spiritual liberation is resting on an absolute truth continuously for 2,500 years in an unbroken change of transmission from human to human to human to human, based on an absolute truth. And the absolute truths that are discovered in Buddhism, or let's just be more specific, that are discovered in our Vipassana meditation, that are discovered in mindfulness meditation or other types of Buddhist meditations, they're universal. They always were absolutely true. They always are absolutely true, and they always will be absolutely true. It was absolutely true for the Buddha 2,500 years ago. It's absolutely true for you and I today, and it'll be absolutely true far in the future. It's absolutely true here in Israel. It's absolutely true in Gaza. Forgive the current example. It's absolutely true in London. It's absolutely true in Hawaii. These are absolute truths, eternal truths. And when it comes to our meditation practice, the word Dhamma means universal principle, means teaching, universal teaching, and it means absolute truth, and it means ultimate reality. And from the Abhidhamma point of view, from the Buddhist psychology point of view, Dhamma is ultimate reality, and all of our practices are designed to organized around an ultimate reality, and are expressions of the discovery of that ultimate reality. So specifically speaking, ultimate reality are the universals in our meditation practice. The three universal characteristics of anicca, dukkha, and anatta, of impermanence, unsatisfactoriness, and non-self are dhammas. These are absolute truths. Doesn't matter if you're Jewish or Buddhist or Muslim or Hindu or atheist or communist or capitalist. The three universal characteristics are universal. All physical and non-physical, pardon me, all physical and non-physical phenomena in the universe are conditioned by these three universal characteristics, anicca, dukkha, and anatta. It's all impermanent. It's all unsatisfactory. In other words, since there's no permanent core to hold on to, there's no ultimate satisfaction. And if you follow that all the way through, it's all empty. It's all non-self. That's a Dhamma. That's an ultimate reality. Those are three ultimate realities that we discover directly, that we see as the eye of insight opens in our meditation practice. As the dust gets removed from our eyes systematically, we begin to see things more clearly, more directly. We see the Dhamma. We see the universal characteristics of anicca, dukkha, and anatta. And it's not the observation of my mental patterns which leads me to spiritual liberation. That's very important. It's not the observation of my sensations that leads me to spiritual liberation. Also very important. It's not the mindful observation of my feelings and my sensations of sounds, of smells, of tastes, of thoughts, of memories, of planning, of all these things in mind. It's not that the observation of those things that purifies the mind, leading down the path towards spiritual observation. It's seeing the core of all of those things: anicca, dukkha, and anatta, the impermanence, the unsatisfactoriness of non-self. The repeated contemplation of the three universal characteristics is what purifies the mind, leads us through the stages of insight, leads us down the path towards spiritual liberation. Dhamma, ultimate reality, is these three universal characteristics, but they are in the manifest universe. The core of ultimate reality is, of course, the unmanifest, is, of course, Nibbana, the unconditioned, the state that's the state experience that is all of our birthrights, that is waiting for everybody who's walking the path of mindfulness meditation, that is waiting down the path for everybody. Path and fruition consciousness is called. Realization and Nibbana, and the partaking, the enjoying of the fruit of that experience, which can be, when trained, the fruit can be accessed more or less regularly. This is the ultimate reality that we're working towards in this practice. And all of the practice, all the teachings of Buddhism are downstream of that. That was the awakening the Buddha had. All the teachings are downstream of that. All these beautiful teachings, not only are they downstream, but they are religio. They are like linking us back to that experience. They lead us back to our true nature. They lead us back to our birthright. We've been thrown out of the Garden of Eden, so to speak, cast out. Not because of sin or shame or anything like that, but simply because of duality. And our meditation practice, our mindfulness-based meditation practice, leads us back to the Garden of Eden. If you'll forgive the mixing of religious metaphors, Nibbana would be compared to the Garden of Eden somehow. So cutting through to this requires certain mental factors that need to be awakened, accessed, and developed. And when these certain mental factors dominate the stream of consciousness, our practice progresses. When these mental factors do not dominate the stream of consciousness, they're not so present in our stream of consciousness. Think back before you did meditation. Think back before you practiced mindfulness. Think back before you did therapy or whatever awareness training you may have done, self-awareness training you may have done. Our minds tended to be more or less dominated by greed, hatred, and delusion. And even today, I mean, you don't have to look far to see how greed, hatred, and delusion are dominating the stream of consciousness. When these very specific factors begin to grow and be cultivated and even flourish in the mind, the unwholesome or unskillful mental states like greed, hatred, and delusion, like desires and aversions and sleepiness, restlessness, and doubts, and all the stuff that we all have, more or less. The purification processes, those reduce, and these positive mental states, skillful mental states rather, wholesome mental states begin to dominate the stream of consciousness. And those wholesome mental states are called the 5 controlling faculties. I'm not going to speak about those, but I will name them. The 5 controlling faculties are Saddha, Vidya, Sati, Samadhi, and Panya in the Pali language, which is none other than faith, energetic effort, mindfulness, concentration, and wisdom. I think I taught about these 5 controlling faculties here in Sangha Live a year or 2 ago, and I'm sure they're somewhere in the archives. So if you want to go back and look for one of my early daily meditations, you can see more about these. It's kind of commonly taught in Vipassana circles, teachers. But when these controlling faculties dominate the stream of consciousness, the mind just moves forward along the path of purification. So cutting through to ultimate reality is a way to cultivate and sharpen these controlling faculties. And this title, Cutting Through to Ultimate Reality, actually comes from my teacher, Sayadaw U Pandita. This is his book. This is a book I got probably 25 years ago. Yeah, maybe a little bit more. In this very life, it's still an amazing book. If you ever do retreats, this is probably the best retreat book to have. Not when you're on retreat, of course. But in here, he talks about one of his chapters. The second chapter is called Cutting Through to Ultimate Reality. And he talks about 9 causes for sharpening these 5 controlling faculties. And these are really, these 9 causes can be applied to very simple daily practices. I'm going to go for about 5 more minutes, and then we'll meditate together. I'll just read the 9 quickly, and then today, in the next 3 days, we'll just pick 4 from this list. Number 1, as a cause to sharpen the controlling faculties for cutting through to ultimate reality, is giving attention to impermanence. Number 2 is practicing with care and respect. Everything that you do it as if, as Thich Nhat Hanh says, you're bathing a newborn baby. Practicing with care and respect. Number 3 is practicing with unbroken continuity. No, I'll repeat the book. I'll tell you the book once again in a moment. Number 3 is practicing with an unbroken continuity of mindfulness as much as possible. Number 4 is applying supportive conditions. For example, Sangha Live. Think of your days with Sangha alive. Think of your days without Sangha alive. Think of your days of meditating. Think of your days where you don't meditate. Think of your days where you're able to walk in nature, days where you're not. It changes how the day goes. So these are supportive conditions. Very, very important for cutting through to ultimate reality. Number 5, reapplying helpful conditions from the past. If something helped you in the past, you can rely on that again. Number 6 is cultivating the enlightenment factors. I won't go into what those are, but there's 7 factors of awakening. Number 7 is practicing with courageous effort. The E word sometimes gets a bad rap in meditation, just basically because we come from a very striving society. So if you bring that striving to meditation, it's problematic. But effort is one of the eightfold constituents, one constituent of the eightfold path. So right effort, and not just right effort, practicing with courageous effort will help you to cut through to spiritual, to ultimate reality. Number 8 is practicing with patience and perseverance. And number 9 is practicing with an unwavering commitment. These are 9 supportive factors of practicing, of cutting through to ultimate reality. The book is In This Very Life. The teacher is Sayadaw U Pandita. Highly, highly recommend. You can see how much this was in my backpack for 8 years, in my yogi years. And I read it through several times, actually. In fact, if you know this book and you hear me teach, you understand that U Pandita was my teacher. Anyways, the first of these supportive factors, and I'll just touch on this briefly, and then we're going to meditate, is giving attention to impermanence. Now, we know that impermanence is one of the 3 universal characteristics. It's the first. Everything's changing. Oh, this too shall pass. This too shall pass is the mantra that helps us kind of remember that things are, in a worldly sense, everything's impermanent. But in a practical sense, when we sit down to meditate, how does impermanence, how does that Dhamma, how does that universal characteristic, the first of the 3 universal characteristics, how does it appear in our practice? A few ways that it appears in our practice is you might sit down to meditate and feel more or less comfortable, and within a short time you feel uncomfortable. You are seeing the universal characteristic of impermanence when that happens. You might sit down and feel a little bit uncomfortable or stressed or upset or at dis-ease in one way or another. Sit down and meditate, anchor into your breath, and that stuff melts away. You're seeing the universal characteristic of impermanence. More specifically, if you're practicing mindful observation of the breath, and you're noticing the breath breathing in and breathing out, and suddenly the breath starts to get shorter, you are seeing directly into the universal characteristic of impermanence. The eye of insight is opening. That is insight. If you're seeing the breath and the breath suddenly starts to become longer, you are seeing into the universal characteristic. You are seeing into the Dhamma of impermanence. If you're breathing and your breath is more or less normal, comfortable, and suddenly it becomes tight and effortful, already you're starting to see the unpleasantness of that. But if you see it change and start to become tight and effortful, you are seeing the Dhamma, the universal characteristic of impermanence. Now, the mistake that many people make when the breath goes from kind of easy breath to a more effortful breath is they go back and they rely on their, let's say, their yoga training or maybe their breathwork training or their whatever training they've done, and they try to regulate the breath back to being comfortable again. Regulating the breath is a healthy thing. Finding comfort is a good thing. However, this little picture of a guy walking a path, or a nun or a monk walking on their path, whatever arises in the path of our practice is the way. Whatever arises in the course of our meditation should be considered as the forward-leading path. So whatever arises is going to be impermanent. So if the breath is going from being nice and comfortable and easy to being uncomfortable and difficult and effortful, do not regulate it away. You're seeing the universal characteristic of impermanence. You're seeing the Dhamma. When you regulate it away, you're stopping the Dhamma. You're stopping that insight from opening. Now, there is a caveat to this instruction. If the discomfort is overwhelming or really like it's enough, then regulate, then take a breath, then stretch, and whatever you need to do. That's completely fine. Do it with mindfulness. Regulate, rebalance. Let that regulating go back to the breath. And should it, which it probably will, should it go back to discomfort again, follow it as long as you can, knowing that you're seeing the universal characteristic of impermanence, and you're also developing a mindfulness of tolerance, tolerance towards discomfort. And there's a range there where we can stay with discomfort. If it's too much, it's too much. Then adjust whatever you have to do. But if you can tolerate that, remember, it's the forward leading path. Because impermanence, seeing change, automatically leads to dukkha, discomfort. Staying with having the tolerance to be mindful, to be and be with dukkha as it's processing will lead you through to anatta, emptiness, non-self, which is always effortless, always free, always relaxed, always comfortable. So that's the process, and we're cycling through that process again and again and again. To see that Dhamma, to see that universal characteristic, to see the ultimate reality of the three universal characteristics begins by paying attention to impermanence in the practice. Okay? So let's practice from here. Sorry, I gotta put my glasses on for just a second. Okay. So we'll sit for 20 minutes. I'll give a short, very short guidance. And then there'll be some time for questions afterwards. Settling into a comfortable position. And just do a momentary check-in of the body, the physical state, knowing if it's comfortable or uncomfortable, knowing if it's pleasant or unpleasant. Whatever the state may be, with no agenda. Accepting and being present and with the physical state. And as you observe the physical body and the sensations and the feelings that may be in the body, notice in this first observation of the body, if anything is changing, if there's any type of impermanence. It was this before and now it's this, or it's this now and it's kind of moving into something else. Should you be aware of that, know that you are giving attention to impermanence, paying attention to impermanence, the first of the three universal characteristics. And shifting your attention to the mind and knowing the mental state as it is in this moment, with no agenda, complete acceptance. As you know your mental state, also recognize that you have a differentiated awareness. In other words, that you're mindful of the mental state and what's currently arising in the mind. And should you observe any changes in the current mental state, it was like that, now it's like this, but it seems to be doing something else. Know that you're seeing the universal characteristic of anicca, impermanence, and pay attention to the impermanence. And shifting your attention to the breath, knowing the conditions, qualities, and state of the breath. Personally, I teach the breath as the primary object, as the home base or the anchor point. If you have a different anchor point, by all means, do that. But I'll just speak about the breath for a moment. And noticing, or while you're noticing the quality, characteristics, sensations in the movement of the breath, in the body, also notice if there's any impermanence or change arising. It was like this a few minutes ago, now it's like this, and it's changing to something else. If the breath is staying the same, then continue to see it staying the same. The wonderful thing about the breath or any other experience that is staying the same is that we can really relax into it and see the details. At a certain point in your practice, the more you're able to see into subtle details, you will begin to realize that the breath is never the same, that an experience from one moment to the next is never the same. It's always, in one way or another, in a big way or in a very subtle way, it's always changing. Having that insight is paying attention to impermanence, the universal characteristic of anicca. And when you see the universal characteristic of anicca, know that you are seeing the Dhamma. You are seeing ultimate reality. Observing each breath in each moment by moment, breath by breath. Feeling the body, bringing your mindfulness back to the body. Feeling the breath, bring your mindfulness back to the breath. Bring your mindfulness to the mind and know your mental state. Feel the space on the inside. And as you slowly open your eyes, coming out of the meditation, feel the space on the outside. Okay. So, take the last 10 or 12 minutes here to answer any questions that anybody may have. So, if you do have a question, please put it in the chat. I believe the routine is to write question at the beginning in capital letters and then write the question afterwards. That way I can find it if it moves up the thread. And just a reminder to everybody that Sangha Live is supported by the generosity of its members. Sangha Live does a wonderful job making these practice spaces available for free for everyone, and inviting many different teachers and doing it with all love and care, and I would say professionalism. So if you value that, and if you care to contribute to the ongoing, the upkeep, and the even growing of the Sangha Live platform, then please offer a donation. You can do so by I believe George will leave a link. Yeah, there's the link right there in the chat. And remember, we support the Dharma. The Dharma supports us. When the Dharma supports us, we support the Dharma. It's a wheel of awesomeness. So yeah, thank you in advance for that. So Lean, hello Lean. Lean has a question here. She says, "Hi Miles. How are phenomena seen from the unmanifested? Are they also the unmanifested? I guess, sorry, it's moving. Okay, as she says, I guess that if you focus on impermanence, that is what you will see. And when you focus on that which is, oh, it's kind of moving, hang on, Lean. And when you focus on that which is constant, that is what you will see. What is the difference in if in your practice you focus on relative, on the absolute?" Well, I mean, let's just talk about mindfulness for a moment, Lean. there's different types of, as you know, there's different types of meditation practice, and mindfulness is a bit of a dualistic practice where we differentiate the awareness and observe. The practice is not to focus on impermanence or to focus on manifest or unmanifest. The practice is to be mindful of what's arising in the present moment. That's it. That's the beginning and the end of all of our practice. And if impermanence is arising, recognize that. If this particular type of manifestation or that particular type of manifestation is arising, then our work is to be mindful of that. We can only be mindful of something that is manifesting. So your first part of the question, because there's a few different things here. The first part of the question, you say, what is it? How are phenomena seen from the unmanifested? The unmanifested in Vipassana means Nibbana specifically. And there is no, in the unmanifested, there's nothing. There's not even observation. There's not an observer. There's not observation. There's not phenomena. There's not non-phenomena. It is radically empty. And even the concept, whatever pre Nibbana experience, whatever you're imagining or conceiving that Nibbana is, it's not that. Can't be that, because that comes from the mind. Nibbana transcends that. Nibbana can be known directly, but understood in reverse, looking back. When you come out of that state, then you know. And they talk about the signs is kind of a common term in the Buddhist scriptures, especially Abhidhamma. And the signs means impermanence, unsatisfactoriness, and non-self, seeing those signs. In Nibbana, there's no signs. And there's no seer of signs. So I'll leave that part for that. Your second part of your question, you say, if you focus on impermanence, Now, it is true, the way that we focus will create the experience that we're having. So it's like the old from quantum mechanics, not to get too scientific here, because I'm not a scientist, but I know that there was this old experiment where they would shoot particles through these little slits. And when the particle would go through from the other side of the slit, you could see particles going through. But then when it was observed in another way, they didn't see particles going through. They saw waves going through. So depending on how, there's a very oversimplification of this experiment, but it was kind of the foundation of quantum mechanics. Depending on how you would observe, you would either see particles or you would see waves. And it's not possible from conventional physics. That's not possible. It's unexplainable. Quantum physics, it is possible. Now, we could quite literally, if we take that into our meditation practice, when we look with a differentiated awareness, in other words, mindfulness, the part of the mind that's mindful of experience, you will see things rising and passing away. You will see things in particle, coming and going, coming and going, coming and going, eventually all just dissolving. And it's quite literally like dissolving, quite literally like particles dissolving at a very, very highly refined state. If you do more of a non-dual meditation, you won't see that. Non-dual meditation doesn't differentiate and observe. Non-dual also negates the observer and is in this kind of just being or presence. Reality will be experienced as a wave. Constant unfolding wave that is in constant unfolding. The experience of Nibbana comes from seeing particles. The realization of non-self, the deepest non-self, comes from the mindfulness meditation of Vipassana, where you see particles, and eventually the mind drops between the particles, and it's Nibbana. So much more to say about that, but let's leave it at that. A non-dual meditation, the realization, the ultimate realization is an experience of not non-self, but of non-duality, of not nothingness, but of everythingness, of oneness. And in the experience of oneness, self is gone, other is gone. It's just oneness. Reality is experienced as a wave. So those are two different ways that we can meditate, two different ways of practicing, two different ways phenomena will appear, and ultimately two different spiritual awakenings, two different realizations. And I've spoke with you before. I know that you practice both of those. So yeah, there's a distinction. And it's good to practice both. It's good to have one, let's say, core practice. Maybe you're a non-dual practitioner, or maybe you're a non-self practitioner. Maybe you're practicing Nibbana, Vipassana, or maybe you're practicing um, some of the non-dual traditions, Dzogchen or Zen. Um, it's good to get grounded in one of those traditions. But the move from one to the other, it's the thinnest veil separates the two. And the difference is having a witness or turning the attention back and dissolving the witness. That's the difference between the two. Thanks, Lynn. Josie says, when I use the breath as an anchor, I automatically start to control it. Any tips on how to observe the breath without changing it? Let's take that in two parts. When I observe the breath as an anchor, I automatically start controlling it. Completely normal and natural. Yeah. And what you're realizing there, that there's a part of the mind that just wants to be in control, right? There's a part of the mind against your best intentions that can't really let go, that gets in the way of just being purely mindful of the experience. That's okay. First and foremost, you've got to accept that. And the job or the work, the practice, the skill that needs to be developed when you have that experience, first is to be full acceptance of what it is. It's go, okay, we're all control freaks. Okay, whatever, more or less. Simply shift the mindfulness from the breath to the part of the mind that's controlling. And it's helpful to use a mental label. You don't have to label, but if you do, just put a label. Find that controlling, it's somewhere in your mind, somewhere between your ears, behind the nose. You'll find it if you just feel and just put a label, controlling, controlling. And then the job is to know the characteristics of that controlling. There's a contraction here, or is that, or my brow is furrowed, or, and by simply knowing that, what happens is you differentiate the awareness from that wrong effort, but it's natural. Don't misunderstand the word wrong. And then when you observe it, the part of you that's observing it, that's pure mindfulness. And what will happen is you'll start to see the impermanent nature of that. It might become more contracted momentarily for a few moments, but then it'll start to relax and eventually it'll disappear. And when it disappears, go back and observe the breath, and notice if there's anything different in the breath. You might notice some changes in the breath at that point. Also, see if you can know the moment the controlling arises. And that's with reflection. So you might be in a little bit of controlling. It's like, okay, so, oh, no, here I am. I'm controlling again. Reflect back to when did the controlling start? A few moments ago. It might be because the breath was like this, and then suddenly the breath started to do something else. Impermanence, universal characteristic of impermanence. So the mind, this happens without us knowing it. The mind jumps in and tries to put it back the way it was. So when you use reflection in your practice, okay, what was the last experience before the controlling? Excuse me, before the controlling started, then you'll start to understand. You'll like bookend the experience. It begins here, and then when I become mindful of it, I'm able to. I see it, and it starts to change, and that's how it changes. So you get a bookmark of that experience. Sorry, a bookend of that experience. Then in the future, should it arise again, you'll start to know that territory a little bit better. Any tips on how to observe the breath without changing it? Well, those are my tips about the controlling nature of the mind, which is natural, which is normal, I should say. Later, it relaxes quite a bit. Any tips on how to observe the breath without changing it? It's an interesting thing you write here, because the simple observation of the breath will cause it to change. Mindfulness activates that inner process, the opening of the eye of insight. And at a certain point, when the eye of insight opens enough, you're going to always see impermanence. So you observe the breath, and right away, it's like maybe the breath is going da, da, now it goes da, 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 or it goes da, da, in, out, or in, out, whatever. So many different ways it'll change. you're seeing change, it's good. The controlling nature is also not a problem. Just be sure that you're mindful of that. You take that as an object. Thanks, Josie. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, if I don't get to all the questions, I'll save them for tomorrow or something. Or at some point, I'll try to answer them. Victoria says, and we have 1 minute. Let me see. No, hang on. Just now it was hard to tell impermanence from distraction, fragmentation, attention, any thoughts. Okay, so just now it was hard to tell impermanence from distractions or fragmentation of intention. Any thoughts? Impermanence happens below the threshold of perception. So I'm seeing the world this way. The universal characteristics are always there. They're there right now. We just don't see them. They're below our threshold of perception. The eye of insight is closed. As the eye of insight opens, or as the threshold of perception deepens, you will begin to see these universal characteristics that are always there. So just now it's hard to tell impermanence from distraction. It's simply because the mind is being distracted still. It's still kind of, maybe it's caught in the hindrances, maybe it's a bit noisy, maybe it's busy. We all have this, it's like a snow globe. When you shake up the snow globe, all those little snow is floating around. It takes a few minutes of mindfulness to settle down. When things settle down and become subtle, we can start to see the universal characteristics of impermanence. What you can do at this state is that it's hard to tell impermanence from distraction or fragmentation of attention. Notice those moments you're not distracted, and if it changes to distraction, just reflect, oh, that's impermanence. Or when the mind is unified and then it begins to fragment, reflect, oh, that's impermanence. It's not the same impermanence that's one of the universal characteristics, but it is a manifestation of impermanence. And remember, one of the we're at time, so I'm going to finish with just this. One of the 9 ways to cut through to ultimate reality is patience, practicing with patience and perseverance. You will see what I'm talking about. I promise you. You don't have to believe me. Believe U Pandit. He's a much greater man than I. You don't even have to believe U Pandit to believe the Buddha. Oh my God. You will see this. With patience and perseverance, you will begin to see the Dhamma. The Dhamma will awaken. It's probably already awakening in you. You have to have faith, the first of the 5 controlling faculties. And when you see this and when you recognize see this, your faith gets a little bit of a boost. Your practice gets strengthened. There's new wind in your sails, so to speak. Okay? Thank you for these questions. I'll try to get to the other questions later in the week. Remember, tomorrow I'm going to be doing a hot seat. If anybody wants to come in and join the hot seat, you have to come on stage with me, camera on. You have to be willing to talk about your practice, and you have to be willing to receive guidance. I won't say anything that's harmful. And ideally somebody who hasn't done this with me before, because we have a big group here. Okay? So cutting through to ultimate reality is the theme for this week, and tomorrow we'll look at another one of the 9 practices for cutting through to ultimate reality. With that, I want to thank you all for joining me today, and may this teaching on cutting through to ultimate reality help you to access, awaken, and establish the 5 controlling faculties to the point where you see the deeper Dhamma, and may that lead you forward in your practice forever and always forward on your path of meditation. Thank you, everybody.